Hello, 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 and welcome to our first podcast, Child Please. I am Erica Simpson,
And I'm Regina Weathersby.
and welcome. So, Regina, how we end up here?
Girl,
Like,
listen, it's been a long journey.
it has. And so, we're going to just use this platform to just kind of tell you who we are, what our mission is, what our goals are, and we just hope that this platform blesses someone. So it started back in November 2024. I picked up the phone and I just called Regina. I was like, I have a vision and God has placed this on my heart. And I just wanted to know, are you willing to walk in this vision with me? And she said yes. So, Regina, I'm going to let you tell them how we got here.
Okay, so just to give a little background, I have two daughters, Nadia and Avery. Um, but prior to that and after that, I had two experiences with pregnancy. I was pregnant before Nadia with a set of twins, both of which lived a short time and passed away. And then after I had my second daughter, I was pregnant and experienced an early miscarriage. And so there were some things along the way during those experiences that really should be considered traumatic experiences. But there was also a part of it where there were gaps. Like there were things that maybe should have happened that didn't happen, or services or supports that should have been offered that weren't offered.
Mm-hmm.
And then Erica had her own very traumatic experience dealing with some infertility issues at the beginning, and then made it to the point of having IVF.
Yes.
And so talk to us about that, because you had the IVF treatment and you had viable embryos
Mm-hmm.
and you were pregnant.
Hello.
So to get to the good part, Marley Rose is here, but there were some things that happened during the process of getting her here that really was a traumatic experience for you. So there were moments in there where I would just say medical staff failed you,
Yeah.
or downplayed your concerns or the things that you brought to their attention. And then there were just flat out some embarrassing moments. I remember you talked about sitting in the waiting room and you were actively bleeding and being told that what you were experiencing was not an emergency and you were in the waiting room. So just give us a little bit about what your experience was and what made you like ultimately say, you know what, and you know how I always say, nobody's coming to save us. Yeah. We got to do something to save ourselves.
So I'm gonna try to give you the short version. As Regina said, me and my husband experienced years of infertility. We started off at one fertility clinic, and then we were there for about a year and a half, and it was just like I just kind of felt like it wasn't going in the way that we thought it should go. So we transferred to another facility, and I had one round of IVF and it was not successful. And I did a second round of IVF, and my current baby, Marley Rose, was my only viable embryo. So let me just take you back so we can give you a little backstory of the blue rose. Blue is the color for maternal health, and rose is my baby's name, and it also represents fertility. But the blue rose is rare. And so I kind of came up with this name because, like I said, I feel like the experience to me was rare. But as I began to speak to different people, it's very common in our community. Almost every Black woman that I have spoke with have experienced some aspect of trauma as it relates to having a baby, getting pregnant, postpartum. And so just wanted to give you the backstory of how we came up with Blue Rose. So we got pregnant with her, like I said, the second round of IVF. And I'm not sure if some people know, but once you have a baby via IVF, they place the embryo, which is the baby, in your uterus. So once they do that, they have to puncture your uterus, and sometimes women develop a hematoma. I know this now after I have had her, but did not know this. So once me and Marvin found out we were having a baby, I was all excited. And with IVF, we did do genetic testing, so we knew that we were having a girl, but I gave Regina the paperwork for the gender, and I had a gender reveal down the road. So I got pregnant. I went back. They told me I was pregnant with my blood work, and I was at work. And I was at work, and I told my coworker, I said, I don't feel well. I stood up. I went to the restroom, but once I got to the restroom, it was just like a whoosh of blood just went everywhere. So I'm freaking out because, like I said, once they put the embryo in, I developed a hematoma. So working at the hospital, walk across the street, because I'm so early in the pregnancy, anything prior to 16 weeks, they don't consider important. And you don't go to the maternity emergency room, you go to the regular emergency room. So my uncle now, I'm at work and blood just goes everywhere. And I go over to the emergency room, just panic because, like, at this point, I'm fixing to be 40. This is my only viable embryo, and I did not want to go through IVF again. So I just know in my mind I'm fixing to lose my baby. I'm going to lose my baby. So they was like, "Ma'am, that's not an emergency. How many weeks are you?" I told them. And so I sat in the waiting room.
I get mad every time you say that because, if blood is everywhere, it looked like an emergency to me. But continue.
So one of my coworkers went with me, who was also a nurse, and she went up and she was like, "At least can we just have a pad to put in the chair? Because, like, I'm sitting in the chair and just blood is everywhere." So I go back, they work me up. Long story short, they was just like, "Oh, this is common. You just have a hematoma. You have a small hematoma." But I'm like, good God, if it was a large hematoma, what would this look like? So they was like, "It shall pass." The baby was still viable, still had a heartbeat. But I can just remember that part was so traumatic because for like weeks after that, I would just be scared to go to the bathroom because I would be scared to wipe that I was going to see blood. Because most times when you see blood, a pregnant woman seeing blood, that's a sign of a miscarriage. Something is wrong. So we went through. Needless to say, I was at that point I became very anxious. And I believe I had anxiety all throughout the pregnancy from that point, but it never was treated. But whenever I would go to appointments, my blood pressure would kind of teeter on the higher side of normal. But I think looking back on it, I think my blood pressure was high because of the anxiety that was not treated.
Mm-hmm.
So fast forward throughout the whole pregnancy. Now, let me just say this: I was sick the whole time, every day, all day. I threw up. But at the end, I started feeling not right. I'll never forget. It was the weekend of my baby shower, and I told my husband, I said, "You know what? It's almost to a point that you just go and just tell him I wasn't able to make it." And he was like, "What?" I was like, "Just go. I wasn't able to make it." But I went. I kind of pushed through.
You know what?
What?
I remember.
Yes.
I remember when you walked in. This just dawned on me. You said you hadn't been feeling good. Do you remember me saying you need to sit down somewhere?
Yes.
I kept saying you need to sit down somewhere. Yeah. But I remember you talking about how you had not been feeling good. Like, I just thought about that.
I had not. That was that Saturday. But a week or so prior to the baby shower, it just dropped in my spirit. And I told Marvin, I said, if I don't make it, if you get to a point with me having this baby and I don't make it, I need you to let me go and choose her. Because I felt that it was important for me to tell him that, because every step of the way something happened. Like, even prior to me even getting ready for IVF, I had a plethora of surgeries, plethora of procedures from this doctor to that doctor. So the Lord had already showed me this birthing experience is not going to be what you see on TV. And so fast forward, we had the baby shower. It was very nice. But honestly, I just really wasn't able to enjoy myself because I felt so bad.
Mm-hmm.
That Wednesday, which was the day before my 40th birthday, I went to work, and I remember I told my supervisor, I said, I feel really bad, and I just need to go home. And she was like, no, just go on and go across the street to the doctor. I said, if you just let me go home so I can lay down, I'll be okay. Um, I went home. I got in the bed, and my husband got ready to go to work. And he was like, you feeling better? I said, but I'll be okay. So I got up, got ready to take a shower, and I walked upstairs because the shower upstairs is a little bigger. It's easier for me to get in and out. And I was just gonna sit down in the shower and take a shower because I just didn't have the strength to stand up. But once I got upstairs, I became, it's like I busted out in a sweat, and it was just like I became faint. And so I remember laying down on the floor, and I dropped my phone, and I reached over and I tapped it because the last person I talked to was one of my friends who was also a nurse. And I called her. I said, I need you to come get me because I'm sick. And she immediately just started hollering, I ain't coming to get you. You know you live in the country. I'm fixing to call paramedics to come get
Stay focused, ma'am.
I was like, I need you to come get me now. So, which I did stay kind of far out. So she was like, well, let me calm down. She calmed down. And she was like, call your neighbor and I'll meet you at the hospital. So I called my neighbor. They came over, and I was like, what's taking so long? So my friend kept talking to me on the phone, and I was like, but how am I going to get downstairs and let my neighbor in? Because I was like, I cannot stand up. She was like, sit on your butt and bump down the stairs so you won't fall. I bumped down the stairs. I got to the door. They came in. Paramedics got there. I had a blood pressure of 60 over 40. By the time I got to the door, 60 over 40. By the time I got to the front door, I passed out. My neighbors, there's a nurse that stayed down the street. They came over. They got me in the paramedics. And then I began to experience a lot of pain. So I told the paramedics, I said, just turn the sirens off because you can't keep going this fast. Because every bump, I just felt like the end, somebody was just stabbing me. I get to the hospital. My husband he was at work. He finally got there. My parents came and they admitted me. They gave me fluids, and I stayed in the hospital. The next day, I turned 40. I stayed in the hospital from Wednesday to Sunday, and during that time, they was like I was constipated. I received 5 enemas, and so by Saturday, I went home Saturday. By Saturday, my blood pressure was back to normal because I had been receiving fluids, and I felt better. So they sent me home, and I'll never forget. I asked the doctor. I said, "Do you mind writing me a doctor's excuse?" So I said, I don't feel like going back to work Monday. He was like, "You need an excuse for what?" I was like, "I just don't." And I was like, "You know what? Never mind." So he finally brought me back a doctor's excuse. When I got home and read the doctor's excuse, it had another patient name on it. So, but that never even mattered because I never made it back. I was back in the hospital before it was time for me to go. And so when I got back to the hospital, that was the first thing they said. They was like, "Oh, we're gonna give you some fluids," because the first time I went, they did an X-ray. They was like, "Yeah, they told us you were impacted with stool, and we're gonna give you some fluids and give you an enema." And I'll never forget, the nurse brought the enema in and told me to give it to myself. So my mom was there. She kind of helped me, and I was like, "Ma'am," I said, "I'm 40 years old." I said, "I'm not constipated. Something is wrong with me." So they went and got another doctor. She came in. Well, we can't figure it out. I was like, "I'm not discharging here. I'm not taking another enema. Something is wrong with me." So by that time, they called in another doctor, and they was like, "Send her to CT." They sent me to CT. I'll never forget one of the techs that took me. I was in so much pain, and she was like very like irritated with me because I couldn't move. I guess move fast enough. And once I got to the CT room, I was hurting so bad that I couldn't lay flat. Every time I laid flat, I felt like I was going to die. They sent me back. The amount I had been in the hospital, in the ER for hours, telling them I felt bad and I was in pain, and I had not received any pain medicine. When I don't know if they changed shifts or they called a new doctor in, they was like, give us some medicine and send her back to CT. When they sent me back to CT, that's when they discovered that my uterus had ripped. So what they had mistaken for stool, was blood. So by that point, I began to kind of just I ain't gonna lie, spazzed out because they was like, you going to delivery. And so I was like, absolutely not. I'm not going to delivery because the last week, because this how long this been going on. Y'all been telling me I've been constipated. And now you telling me you finna take my baby at 30 weeks. And so it was so traumatic. I mean, I flipped out. But then the comment that I made to Marvin a couple of weeks ago, like if you had to choose to let me go and keep our baby, that really became like I was like, oh, this finna be real. And so she came. She was early. Other than small, she was healthy, and she stayed in the hospital for 5 weeks. And I do remember. It's like that's when it really started. Like, because they discharged me. So as a result of the ruptured uterus, I had a hysterectomy. So that went our chances for having any other kids. And I discharged from the hospital with absolutely no services. No mental health services, no recommendation for a support group. And because I lost a lot of blood, and it's like I just kind of feel like I kind of was left on an island. So that's my story. And like I said, this is our box. I don't know if I've shared this with you, Regina, but like
got here,
I remember she spent a few days, and gotta forgive me because I'm a little emotional. She spent Mother's Day, so this was her little outfit that she wore for Mother's Day. But this is my box with all of this is my survival kit. All of my IVF needles. Girl, it's a plethora.
Do you know how many it is?
I stopped counting. It's over 100.
Yeah, that's a lot.
This is. She was so little. This is her first little diaper. This is her blood pressure cup and things they sent me home with from the hospital.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how the Blue Rose was birthed.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna let you.
This brings so many memories back to me. I know for me, with our first pregnancy with the twins, everything was going fine. I remember going to a doctor's appointment, and my doctor told me, he was like, okay, so there's a little opening at the top of your cervix. And I wouldn't, he did this twice. So I remember he did his hands like this. He said, your cervix should be like this with the baby up here, but it's closed. And he said it's like that right now. So it's a little open. So what he told me was, I'm going to let you come back in 2 weeks. And he was like, just try to take it easy. You can still do your normal activities, but sit down as much as you can. Try to avoid, too much walking or whatever. And then we'll just check back in 2 weeks. And so I'm not thinking anything, So I went on back to life as normal. I worked on the other side of town, so I'm driving to work every day. Going upstairs at work. I had a little office chair. So when I did get to my office, I did at least sit down and shower, roll wherever I had to go within the office or whatever. But going back downstairs when it was time to go home, driving back across town, and just, functioning as normal. So when I went back to my 2 week, the appointment that he had set for 2 weeks out, and they did my ultrasound. When he came to talk to me, he did his hands like this again. He said, last time you were here, your cervix was here.
Mm-hmm.
Today is here. It had opened up completely almost. And so he said, we're going to have to keep you in the hospital until you deliver the baby. So we're in like, what, 20 weeks, 21 weeks. And so I'm still not thinking we're going to deliver a baby soon. I'm thinking, oh, crap, I got to be on bed rest for however many months until these babies come. But whatever, I have the time at work, it's fine. And so they admitted me into the hospital and all of that. We went over there. And then another doctor in the practice was the one who was on call that night. And so he came, he was doing his little rounds after I got admitted. I was in the room and stuff. And I remember he walked in the door and I was coming out of the bathroom. And this man looked at me and he said, "What are you doing?" And I was like, I just went to the wait a minute, who you talk to? But I was like, I just went to the restroom. And he was like, "No, ma'am, absolutely not." He said, "Get in that bed. You cannot move." And so the way that he was an older doctor, and I appreciated his urgency because when I looked at his face and the way that he was looking at me and how he was talking to me, and he was the right person because for me, you got to handle me like that sometimes. But he said, "You can't move." He said, "You can't get up and go to the restroom. No, ma'am. It is a full bed rest." And he was like, "Do you understand how serious this is?"
No, I don't.
Clearly not. Clearly not. Enlighten me, please, And so I think him doing that made me realize, like, this is beyond you're going to be in the hospital for months. And so we were in the hospital for a couple of days. I started having pains or whatever. I thought that I was constipated. They had given me a laxative or whatever. And I just remember one night, I know I called that nurse. She was such a sweet nurse, back and forth several times because I was like, I had to use the restroom. So she would come in there and get me prepared for that. And then I could use the restroom. And so it was like early morning. Just all of a sudden, I thought I had to use the restroom and my water broke. And that was dramatic in and of itself because I wasn't expecting that.
Mm-hmm.
And so everybody's running around trying to get us ready. We had to go down to labor and delivery. And so I went in there, and it was a very quick thing, I guess because they were small. They were like 2 pounds each. But I delivered my son first, and I can remember because they leaned him up against my leg. I could still feel how that felt. And I remember it was somebody standing there just doing the oxygen into him. And so they did that until they were able to get him connected to everything to take to NICU. And then so there was a little brief kind of intermission, and they told me that my daughter, it didn't look like she was about to come out. And so they were going to try to do whatever they could do to hold her in as long as they could. And like, we'll deliver her at a later date, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, okay. But I knew, like, in my spirit, like, I knew that he wasn't coming without her coming too. And I just knew that because I know the Lord had spoke to me about some things beforehand with them. I didn't know that the situation was going to turn out like that, but I knew that they would be together, And so almost immediately after the doctor said that, she said, "Oh, nope, she's coming." And so being she was born, same thing with her. they were able to take her to the NICU. So both of them were in the NICU. They were in separate rooms. And so for my son, he lived 2 days. And for her, she lived 7 days. So she was a little fighter. She was a fighter. He was more sick than she was because he was the baby that was on the bottom, so he was more exposed than she was. So the brunt of whatever, he caught it. And so but she did really well. She, all of her, everything was functioning with her. She was able to use the restroom and all of those things. She ended up having some internal bleeding, and she was too little for them to do surgery on, so they weren't able to do anything with that. So that ultimately is what happened at the end for her. But she lived, I think it was 5 days, 5, 6, 7. I don't know. It's somewhat of a blur now because it just seems so unreal. Like it doesn't even feel like that was something that really happened in my life. I think mentally I separated myself from that, because not separated myself completely, but compartmentalized it.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you think about it in the fullness of what it is, it's overwhelming.
It is.
And so you kind of self-preservation. But I think that is the importance of this foundation. Mm-hmm. Because in our community, we have to be able to talk about things. We have to be able to address things, because that's what helps us to heal. When we have this idea that this is a common thing, a lot of people deal with this, a lot of people have this experience, and you just pick up and go on, that's not the way to handle that. Mm-mm. You need support. Thank God for sisters. My sister planned funerals for me. I didn't know what was going on. I just showed up when it was time because I wasn't in the headspace to do that. But in that situation, I had the support of my family. But I remember when I left the hospital, they give you all these pamphlets and stuff in a folder. And what am I going to do with it? I'm not about to read through this stuff, right, to find some support for myself. But I remember the phone call that I got from the hospital after the fact was, we're calling to see if you want to donate the milk that was left over.
For your baby.
Yeah. And so I understand. I know that babies need milk. I understand that. The other kids need that. But check on me. Make sure I'm connected to something. Don't call me to get something from me in this very vulnerable moment, and you haven't checked on my well-being. I went to the hospital pregnant with 2 babies. I'm at home with none. You get what I'm saying? And so I think that it's important for us, like we say this, I think this is our running little phrase, nobody gonna come and save us. Mm-mm. And so I think that was the ideal. So I'm so glad you asked me about joining with you in creating this foundation, because it gives us an avenue and a safe place for people to be able to talk about their experiences. Because it resonates with people. We've talked to a lot of people, and I don't think we've come in contact with anybody in any background or profession, any Black woman who hasn't been able to share an experience that, right, they've had, but where was the support?
And that's the thing. I think in our society, like as Black women, we are trained. It's in our genetics that we move on. Mm-hmm. Like even as a Black mom now, like a year later, I really sometimes don't even have time for myself. I go to work, make sure I come home, do what I need to do to help my husband get ready to go to work. And it's just like this, but it's just like, where is the time for me? Mm-hmm. And I even remember after having Marley, that people even began to ask, when y'all gonna have another one?
Yeah, and see that question, like, first of all, I don't want to be rude, but it's not your business. Yeah. It's not, because you don't know what that question is insensitive to me. because you don't know people's story. You don't know, and I know people. I think it's a joy in seeing people's families or whatever, and seeing people's families grow. And so I get that. But sometimes when people ask that question, you don't really know what you're asking somebody.
And I think that kind of also sparked me wanting to start this foundation, because I remember it was back in October 2024. I made a post on Instagram, and most of my friends, I've been very open about my experience, my infertility, and my IVF, but I don't think a lot of people just knew like all of the background. And so when I made the post, I was just like, let's normalize, you know, just not saying anything.
Yeah.
Like let's normalize not speaking on somebody else's uterus, because that's when I shared with them, like, yes, I've had the baby, but like a lot of people on the back end did not know that as a result of a ruptured uterus, I did have to have a hysterectomy.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, I'm very joyous for my baby, and I'm very thankful that God allowed me to live as well as her. But it's also a grieving process.
Yeah.
Like, it's some grief there. I grieve the fact that I wasn't able to have the I already knew because I was high risk in my previous surgeries. I already had to have a C-section, but I grieve the fact that I wasn't able to have the C-section that I was planning for. Like, I had her around 10 o'clock. It was like 9, 10 o'clock that night before I laid eyes on her.
Mm-hmm.
I grieve the fact that me and my husband, because we're a little older. We had already said we probably weren't gonna have any other kids, but it's a whole different ball game when that option is taken from you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, life, I mean, in everything there are choices, but once you become choiceless,
yeah,
I think that changes the game. And so I don't know, like, I feel like this foundation, I want to be able to offer women just a platform to talk, because every time me and you talk, I learned bits and pieces about your story that I didn't know,
mm-hmm.
and vice versa. And I feel like it's therapeutic for us just to be able to talk.
It's a place of healing. It's a place of emotional healing. You know what I'm saying? And then I think that even though our stories are very different, I think that there's still, just common ground in that other people have had experiences that have brought about a set of emotions or experiences that only people who have had these experiences can identify with. You know what I'm saying? So I think that's the importance of even a support group, because sometimes you can feel so alone. I know you talk often about you went through IVL. You went through some infertility. Well, that wasn't my experience, and so as your friend, even going through that, I don't know the experience of going to clinic and not seeing anyone there that looks like you, doctors or patients, or I don't know that experience in the way that you do. But other moms who gone through IVF, they know they know those experiences differently. So to be able to have a group of women who've had that experience that you can talk to and identify with brings, I think, another level of healing for you.
It does.
In that. And I think the same for different areas. And then just to know that it's okay sometimes not to be okay. Mm-hmm. And I think we got to be okay with the not being okay. Yeah. Because I know for me, so we had the two Nadia and Avery, our girls. And then after that, I was pregnant again. And I had an earlier miscarriage. And I remember I went to the doctor. They said, we don't have a heartbeat. That's what the ultrasound lady told me. And it was very just kind of bland conversation. I went in the doctor's office and he was like, I'm sorry, kind of like that. And I had a pretty good relationship with this second doctor that I had. And so I just fell all out on the man couch. I'm not doing this no more. I'm tired of this. It's too much.
You notorious for falling out.
I'm just I lost control for a minute. And so, but I also, and this is I think where we miss it sometimes. After I had my moment, I said, okay, pull myself together. You know, all right, this is what we doing. I'm gonna go to this desk and make my next appointment for when I come back. I got in my car. Where did I go?
Back to work.
Back to work. Business as usual. These people telling me there's a lifeless child inside of me. And I went back to work. You get what I'm saying? That's crazy. When I think about it now, like, why did I go back to work? But I went back to work and I handled business. I stayed there till it was time to leave. And I didn't experience the physical part of that miscarriage until that night. And I had no idea it was going to be like how it was. It was very painful for me. It lasted a long time, like pretty much all night. It was a painful experience. But then just even seeing this happen and knowing that this was supposed to be a child, that you had running around your house, and what do you do with it? There's, and then I think the difference with that one was it was the same support that was around me with the twins. I didn't have that because people didn't. It was an early miscarriage, so it was first trimester, but people didn't know. So nobody's checking on you like that unless you told them. But then that requires you to having to tell them. You know what I mean? So I think just having a place, like I said, where we can talk, we can have the conversations that haven't been had, we can find healing, in each other. We can get information. We can get educated on the things that we need to be asking our medical providers about, being able to identify symptoms when they come up so that we get treatment early and regularly to try to address some of this stuff, doing what we can on our end to make sure that we are our healthiest selves, at the point that we become pregnant, so that we don't have some of the risk factors that are associated with some of the challenges that come up that are prevalent in our community. So that's what we're here for.
That's all. And by the way, y'all, next time when we go live, I will make sure Regina don't have me sitting on the couch where my feet ain't touching the floor. So that's why I'm doing all this moving. I can't get comfortable. My feet sleep.
Oh my goodness! Why?
But and so Regina,
that is funny.
I'm gonna let you tell them how we came up with this term for our podcast, Child Please.
Child Please. Because, of course, we said this is a foundation dedicated to providing support for Black women and their families. And in our community, that's a phrase. I mean, it means a lot. Child Please. You talking to somebody, child please, go on somewhere, or it could, just so many different meanings behind it. It's a phrase that we use, but also it's sometimes you just want a child, please. You want to be able to, please let me have a child. Let me live to be able to see my child. Yeah. Give me what I need to be able to,
to take care of my child.
Yes. And let me have the support that I need. So it's a phrase that we use, but also it's a request that many Black women make without even knowing that they're making it, because there's so many challenges, so many things. And we talked about too just how some of these things are. I mean, we would be negligent to not say some of these things are based in practices that are biased to race.
Yeah.
And it may not always be intentional, but it's how our society has kind of supported. It's what's been supported and kind of ingrained in like the thread of our society. And we'll have a podcast where we talk about the history of, but even when you look at the history of maternal health and gynecology and how it came about and how a lot of things were done to Black women to learn about a woman's body and reproductive system. And so there are just some things that, we got to be able to address it, and we got to be able to empower and support our community so that other people don't have some of these same experiences. And if you do have those experiences, that you have a network of people that you can come to, you know what I mean, for support. So, child, please. Child, please.
Well, we thank you for your time. Thank you for tuning in, and go follow us on our website www.thebluerosefoundation.org, and we will see you next time.
Bye.